Section 5, moving from compliance to best practice. This section of our Lighthouse training session moves us from compliance in the doctoral supervisory space, you know, that white-knuckle right, hanging on to regulations, hanging on to policies, and it moves us to excellence, creating a research culture of excellence, achievement, passion and aspiration. We'll be working particularly on the characteristics of a great supervisory relationship. Right now at CDU, most of our higher degree students are PhD students. A small slice is a master's by research, and that is a declining arc, a declining enrolment. But we have international students, students living outside of the Northern Territory, and indeed Australia. We have part-time students. So doctoral education is everything to a university. I've said it far too often probably, but if Australian universities get doctoral education wrong, if we dumb this thing down, then we really should close up shop, because the PhD is the qualification of the university. They are that important. But they're also important for funding, and this is the significant bit. All the funding we receive from the government comes via completions. So what that means is student load is not funded. So the university is subsidising the student throughout the entirety of the enrolment. Only the completions are funded. And that is why I worry when supervisors don't focus on the completion, and particularly completion in the minimum time. It is dreadful for the student to have year after year after year of enrolment, but it's also dreadful for the university. You see, anyone can supervise, but not many can supervise to completion. And even fewer can supervise to completion in the minimum time. And that's our aspiration. That is excellence. Supervision is easy. It's great to have a cup of coffee with your candidate and have a chat with an intelligent person. But supervision to completion is hard, and it is important to remember that difference. And these statements are coming from a woman who's had to far too often pick up the pieces in our universities when I've worked around the world where someone is supposedly supervised or not, and the student is nowhere near completion, nowhere near an examinable standard, and I have to find a few thousand hours in a very, very short period of time to basically squeeze 3 years of supervision into 6 months. I lose weekends, I do all-nighters, I have to work the student to the bone because a supervisor did not focus on the completion. But completions also matter to you and your career. Promotions require a commitment and a success in doctoral education. And every university in the world wants to hire a successful doctoral supervisor who can deliver results in the minimum time. Also, if the supervisor can attract students, that's great, brilliant, but they need to complete. Also, internationally, there is an increasing emphasis on research training, so completing students in the minimum time while also ensuring that they gain research training and an array of skills. So this is tough. So let's talk about you, and let's talk about supervisory models. One of my big issues that makes me a bit crazy is the assumption that experience of supervision as a doctoral candidate leads to expertise in supervision. Early career supervisors, and some well-dodgy late career supervisors as well, endlessly return to their experience of supervision. And sentences that begin with, "when I did my PhD," never end well. Where else in your research life would you generalise from a data point of 1? Now, I had a dreadful supervisor, and that was a blessing because I couldn't replicate that strategy or andragogy. Therefore, take a moment now and think about deeply your experience of supervision as a student. What went well, what went badly, and then park it. Move beyond it. realise that it is a different time, and expectations of research, supervisory training, compliance, quality assurance, international education have all transformed. Most PhD students now are not on scholarship. So how do you change your andragogy for part-time candidature? How do we increase the enrolment and success of Indigenous students while decolonising the doctorate? How do we supervise a 24-year-old woman in comparison to a 77-year-old man? How do we manage, how do we critique ageism in our universities? 20% of the Australian population has a disability. Only 5% of PhD students have a disability. So how do we rectify that imbalance? And for trans students, how do we enable and support their candidature while recognising the transphobia in much of the rest of their lives? So that's just a taste of the thousands of questions we need to ask ourselves about doctoral education now. Therefore, we all have to think deeply about the characteristics of a successful supervisor. Do you have a supervisory model, and where does that come from? And is that model appropriate for today, for the volatile time in higher education? It is important that we all think about, why do we want to supervise? Why do you want to supervise? And remember my point, supervision is a privilege, it's not a right. And for me, the continuum of reasons why academics move into supervision is on a continuum, I think. So it moves from profound selfishness to profound intellectual generosity. So, on one end, you're supervising because you get a lot out of it. Or you're supervising because you're giving back to higher education. Now, of course, very few people are on either end there, so locate yourself on that continuum. It is important to ask yourself, why supervise? Now, on the selfish end, and there's a bit of danger, Will Robinson danger here, supervisors are using students to enable their own research. So let me play devil's advocate here. A supervisor thinks they can cruise through some easy publications on the back of a student's work, and I see this so often. Please don't do this. Have the conversations with students about IP, authorship, ownership. Do not make assumptions that you have the right to add your name to an article. By Australian research guidelines, there are now very, very precise requirements to add your name to an article. So deploy the research code. And ask yourself, what sort of academic are you if you need to leverage the work of your students? I'm being provocative because I want to provoke you. You know, there's that old football chant, soccer chant. Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Often at the referee. And I would really like you to think about, who are you? Are you that supervisor that's interested in what you can get from your students? So be honest about that characteristic in yourself if that's the case, and be as honest as you can with your students right at the start. Now, I've been pretty staunch here, but I cannot convey to you the horror stories that I've seen and heard in the last 20 years, when students simply lost control of their own research and their own words, because supervisors simply sucked up that research into their own CV. And a warning here, students are fighting back. They are reporting their supervisors for research integrity breaches and breaches in authorship around the world. This is happening, this is real, and it really does not end well for the supervisor who argues, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it's always been in my discipline. Firstly, you know, I know, this is not the way that it's always been. And secondly, we have a research code today, and all of us must live within that code. There are, of course, positive reasons to supervise. It's a joy to work with brilliant people developing fresh ideas. It's exciting to be around clever, innovative people, and it can freshen up your research by example. Supervision is also a way to pay back higher education for the gifts that it's given us, sharing our expertise, our skills, our abilities with the next generation. This is the apprenticeship model. This is the mentorship model. Also, though, doctoral supervision and examination is a terrific way to build up local, national and international links. It is amazing how many long-term friendships I've made by sending an examination request to an international scholar, somebody I don't know at all, and then after the examination we discover an array of interesting collaborations and build friendships. Brilliant. So make sure that your motivations for doctoral supervision are strong and sound. Supervision is tough, it occupies nights, it occupies weekends, reading chapters in and around the rest of your life. And that's why we should talk about workload. What is increasingly happening is that some areas of higher education have a booming number of postgraduates and other areas do not. So if you are interested in supervising, well, you've done the right thing here. You're commencing your supervisory training, and I thank you for that. But also talk with senior colleagues around the university. Express your desire to supervise and ensure, and this is important for the entire university, that every single person that sends an email or makes a phone call about supervision is handled with respect and care. If you can't supervise them, send that query to your Associate Dean Research or send that query on to me. The prospective student deserves care, respect and time, and our colleagues in the university who would like to supervise deserve that opportunity. Research excellence is built not on bullying and bluster, but on kindness, compassion, decency, respect and authenticity. We have one last section of your training. Yes, your assignment.